There comes a moment in every journey when the weight becomes too heavy, the silence too loud, and the hope too faint to hold on to. You stand at the edge of your limits, staring into a darkness that feels endless, wondering if you have anything left to give. It is the kind of moment when quitting doesn't just seem tempting, it seems logical. You begin to believe that maybe the dream was too big, the road too long, the burden too much for your tired hands. But what if the moment you feel most abandoned is the moment heaven is leaning closest to you? What if the very second you whisper, "I can't do this anymore," is the exact second God is preparing to send a sign that shifts everything? A sign that doesn't arrive with thunder or flashes of light, but with a quiet power that speaks directly to the part of you that still wants to believe. Before you give up, pause. Because the moment right before surrender is often the moment when God steps in, not to rescue your plans, but to remind you of His presence. And that presence changes everything. When you reach the breaking point, it never arrives suddenly. It comes quietly, almost unnoticed at first, like a slow dimming of the light inside you. There is a day when you realize that the road you have been walking feels heavier than ever, and each step demands more strength than you have left to give. You look at the pieces of your efforts, scattered by disappointment, and you wonder if maybe this is where your journey ends. You wonder if giving up is not a failure but a release. And it is in this fragile space where your hands tremble from holding on too long that something sacred begins to move. The breaking point often comes right before the breakthrough, not because life is cruel, but because the weight that weakens you is shaping you into someone capable of receiving what you prayed for. There is a moment when your voice grows tired from calling out and hearing nothing in return, when your heart feels as though it has been stretched too thin, and when the dreams that once burned brightly now flicker like candles gasping for air. It's easy to believe that silence means abandonment, that delay means denial, and that struggle means you were never meant to climb this far. But the breaking point is not the end of faith, it is the final test of it. It is the place where your strength ends and your surrender begins, where your human effort fades so that divine intervention can enter. When you are too tired to lift your own prayers, the heavens begin lifting them for you. Every person who has walked a meaningful path has reached this moment, a moment where the heart says, "I can't do this anymore," and the soul whispers back, "But you must." This is where you learn that breakthroughs do not come to those who feel strong. They come to those who feel broken yet refuse to stop breathing hope. When you stand in the valley of exhaustion, unable to see the mountain peak you once aimed for, something shifts that cannot be explained. It is as though the very struggle that threatened to crush you becomes the soil where your new strength takes root. The breaking point becomes the birthplace of transformation. In this moment, God watches more closely than ever, not because He wants to see you suffer, but because He knows you are standing at the threshold of becoming. He knows that the heart must sometimes be emptied of certainty before it can be filled with purpose again. When your hope drains, you create space for a sign, for a blessing, for a new direction to enter. When your tears fall, they soften the ground beneath your feet so destiny can finally take hold. The exhaustion you feel is not a signal that you are unworthy, but that you are on the last stretch of a journey that demanded everything you are so you could step into everything you are meant to be. The breaking point is where clarity sharpens. When you are stripped of your illusions, your fears, and your expectations, you see with a different kind of vision. You no longer look for the easiest path, you look for the truest one. You no longer ask for everything to go your way, you ask for the strength to walk the way meant for you. You no longer chase signs desperately, you begin to understand that they come when they are supposed to come, not when you demand them. This moment teaches you that giving up is not the answer. Giving in to divine timing is. You may not feel prepared, you may not feel strong, and you may not feel hopeful, but the breaking point is proof that you have reached the threshold of divine rearrangement. Everything you have endured has brought you here, to this thin line between collapse and awakening. And as the weight pushes you closer to surrender, what you do not realize is that help is already on the way, that the breakthrough is already forming, and that the sign you long for is closer than your next breath. The breaking point is not your ending, it is the final whisper before God steps in. God's signs do not arrive in the way we imagine. They don't always split the sky open or shake the ground beneath our feet. More often, they slip into our lives the way dawn slips into darkness, slowly, gently, almost shyly, as if not to startle a weary heart. When you are close to giving up, you expect a miracle to roar, to flash brilliantly, to declare itself as unmistakable proof that God has heard you. But divine guidance rarely chooses dramatic entrances. Instead, it chooses whispers, quiet shifts in the air, small stirrings of the spirit that brush against your thoughts just when you begin doubting everything you once believed. There is a reason for this softness. When your heart is fragile, too loud a sign could break it further. So God speaks to you in ways that require listening, not looking, in ways that ask your soul to feel rather than your eyes to see. The gentle whisper may come as a sudden calm on a night when you expected to drown in your anxiety. It might be a memory rising unexpectedly, reminding you of a strength you thought had vanished. It might be a sentence you overhear from a stranger, echoing the very question you quietly wrestled with in your heart. Sometimes it is the warmth of a moment, brief but powerful, that tells you that even though everything feels heavy, you are not carrying it alone. These signs are delicate because they are meant to reach the places inside you that loudness cannot touch. When everything around you feels overwhelming, subtlety becomes the most healing form of direction. A whisper from God is not meant to prove something to your mind. It is meant to awaken something in your spirit. When you are at your lowest, your senses shift. You no longer expect grand gestures. You search instead for anything that feels like hope. And in that searching, your heart becomes more open than ever before. This openness is where God plants his signs. A gentle nudge, an unexpected peace, a thought that says, do not stop yet, even when everything else in you screams that you should. The softness of these signs is intentional. It requires trust to hear a whisper. It requires faith to follow something you cannot fully explain. And faith is what God is inviting you to rediscover in that moment. When a sign arrives quietly, it teaches you to slow down. You stop rushing, stop forcing, stop trying to control outcomes that were never yours to control. You begin to hear the small things you once ignored, the instinct tugging at your chest, the dream refusing to die, the inner voice reminding you that surrender is not the same as defeat. You realize that the whispers were always there, but you were too busy fighting battles in your head to notice the answers forming in your spirit. When everything becomes too quiet, it is not emptiness, it is space being created for God's voice. These gentle signs are also a reflection of God's nature. He does not impose himself, he invites. He does not coerce, he calls softly. He does not demand attention. He draws your attention by touching places inside you that only he can reach. And it is in your weakest hour that his quiet guidance becomes the most powerful. When you are close to giving up, your soul becomes more sensitive, more honest, more able to discern what truly matters. You begin to notice the small miracles, the moment your heartbeat steadies after a long cry, the way your fears loosen their grip for a moment, the truth that rises within you even when logic argues against it. A divine whisper often arrives as clarity after confusion. You might not know what to do next, but you suddenly know what not to do. You might still feel the weight of your struggle, but you sense that this is not the place where your story ends. You might still be afraid, but the fear no longer has the final word. These subtle shifts are signs in their purest form. They remind you that God sees you even in silence. They remind you that he speaks to you in ways tailored to your heart's capacity. And they remind you that when you are about to give up, you do not need a storm to turn you. Sometimes all you need is a whisper strong enough to lift your spirit back to its feet. In the quietest moments, when you least expect it, God's whisper becomes the thread that pulls you back from the edge. It is His way of telling you that even though your strength is fading, His is not. And His sign, soft as it may be, is enough to keep you going. When life is comfortable, faith feels easy. You walk with confidence because everything around you agrees with your hope. Doors open smoothly, your strength feels steady, and the path ahead appears clear enough for you to trust your steps. But a sign from God rarely arrives in those moments of comfort. It comes when you feel stretched beyond your limit, when your prayers sound repetitive even to your own ears, when your heart grows weary from waiting with no visible change in sight. That is the moment when your faith is being tested, not to break you, but to reveal what you have not yet uncovered within yourself. God sends direction at the edge of surrender, because it is in that fragile space where fear, doubt, and hope collide that your soul becomes most receptive to divine truth. Tests of faith do not come dressed as obstacles meant to punish you. They come as invitations to rise beyond the surface, level confidence you had when everything was going well. Only when the journey becomes difficult do you discover the depth of your endurance and the sincerity of your trust. You learn to rely on something more than your abilities, your plans, or your expectations. When you walk into a season where nothing seems certain, your heart begins searching for guidance in a way it never did before. And it is in that searching that God steps closer. The discomfort does not chase Him away, it calls Him near. The silence does not mean abandonment, it is the space where your faith grows sharper. When you feel like giving up, that is often the moment when God begins preparing a sign tailored to your struggle. He waits until the very edge of your breaking point, because that is where your pride dissolves, your resistance softens, and your heart becomes honest enough to hear Him. In comfort, you might overlook His guidance. In chaos, you cling to it as if it were the last light in a dimming world. The test intensifies not because God wants you to suffer, but because He wants you to see how deeply you are capable of trusting Him. He knows that if the sign came too early, you might rely on the sign instead of the faith that leads you to it. A test of faith often looks like unanswered prayers. You speak into the heavens and hear nothing but the sound of your own breathing. You take a step forward only to be pushed back by circumstances you cannot control. You try your best to stay hopeful, yet doubt slips in, whispering that maybe your efforts are wasted. But hidden within this struggle is a spiritual refinement. You are being stretched so that your faith becomes strong enough to carry the next chapter of your life. You are being stripped of illusions, impatience, and fear so that the sign God sends will not just guide you but transform you. The moment your faith wavers is the moment God's presence grows more intentional. You may not feel it, but He is rearranging pieces behind the scenes, aligning people, opportunities, and moments that will converge into the sign you have been waiting for. He watches your trembling steps, your sleepless nights, your silent tears, and He knows that you are near the place where your spirit will either break or awaken. And because He loves you, He chooses awakening. That is why the sign appears not when you feel strong, but when you feel fragile. Not when you are certain, but when you are lost. Not when you are steady, but when you are collapsing. It arrives precisely when it will mean the most. The test of faith is also a test of patience. It is easy to trust when time moves quickly. It is much harder when the world grows still and you feel forgotten. But God uses that stillness to refine your vision. He teaches you to see beyond what is visible, to believe in what has not yet taken shape. He lets you feel the full weight of waiting so that when the sign comes, you will recognize it without question. It will not feel random. It will feel like a message sent directly to your heart, a reminder that your endurance mattered, that your tears were noticed, and that your perseverance was not in vain. And when the sign finally reaches you, it arrives with a timing that makes you understand why you had to wait, why you had to struggle, and why your faith had to be tested. The transformation that happened within you during the trial becomes just as important as the guidance you receive. You step into clarity because the struggle carved space for it. You hold on to hope because endurance taught you its value. And you move forward with a renewed spirit because God's sign came exactly when your faith needed it the most. When life weighs heavily on your shoulders and the future blurs into uncertainty, it becomes difficult to remember why you started or where you were heading. There are seasons when the path you once walked with confidence suddenly feels foreign, and every step forward feels like stepping deeper into fog. Doubt begins to grow roots in your mind, and you start questioning whether your efforts still matter, whether your prayers still reach heaven, whether you are still on the path meant for you. In these moments, your vision does not disappear. It simply becomes clouded by fatigue, fear, and emotional exhaustion. That is when God sends a sign, not to create a new path, but to realign you with the purpose you slowly drifted away from. It is not a loud awakening, but a gentle restoration, a reminder that clarity is not lost, it is waiting to be uncovered. Divine realignment often begins with a small shift inside your heart. You may not notice the change immediately, but something begins to stir. A forgotten dream resurfaces, a spark of hope returns, or a moment of peace arrives unexpectedly. These signs are not random. They are God's way of nudging you back toward the direction you were meant to go. When your vision becomes blurry, you become vulnerable to giving up, not because you lack strength, but because you cannot see what you are fighting for. God knows this, and He steps in with a sign that reminds you of the promise hidden beneath your struggle. It is a whisper to your soul that says, "You have not lost your way. Look again." The divine sign often reconnects you with the prayers you once made with passion. The dreams that felt unreachable begin to feel alive again. The goals that seemed too distant suddenly feel within sight. Sometimes, all it takes is one moment of clarity to awaken a hope that had been buried under disappointment. Maybe someone speaks a word that mirrors your deepest thoughts. Maybe an unexpected opportunity appears that aligns perfectly with what you once longed for. Maybe you experience a sudden inner calm that sweeps away the chaos that tormented your mind. These are not coincidences, they are reminders from God that your purpose did not fade just because your strength did. Realignment also brings truth to the surface. When your path becomes blurry, confusion distorts your judgment. You start making decisions from fear instead of faith, from pressure instead of wisdom. But God's sign cuts through that confusion. It brings you back to who you truly are, not who your struggles tried to make you. It highlights what matters and reveals what you must release. Sometimes the sign is clarity about the people who should stay and those who should go. Sometimes it shows you that the door you kept knocking on was never meant to open. Sometimes it reveals that the thing you considered a setback was actually protection. Every sign carries a purpose to restore the vision that trials attempted to steal. When God realigns you, you begin to see your journey from a higher perspective. You realize that the delays were not meant to punish you, they were shaping you. You understand that the detours were not meant to confuse you, they were redirecting you. A blurry vision often comes from focusing too much on the struggle and too little on the meaning behind it. God's sign shifts your focus back to purpose. It reminds you that your story is not defined by the hardships in front of you, but by the destiny placed within you. The moment clarity returns, the weight on your chest begins to lift. You breathe differently. You think differently. You walk differently. Realignment is also a form of reassurance. When you lose sight of your purpose, you often feel alone, abandoned, or unseen. But a sign from God is proof that you are not walking blindly. It shows that you are guided, even when you cannot see the guide. It tells you that your journey is watched over, your tears are witnessed, and your hope is worth protecting. A blurry path is not the end of direction, it is the space where God recalibrates you for what comes next. And as He realigns your vision, He also rebuilds your strength. You begin to realize that giving up was never your true desire, you only wanted clarity. And God answers that desire with a sign that brings your purpose back into focus. When the sign reaches you, it does more than guide your steps. It revives your heart. It awakens your spirit. It realigns you with the version of yourself that believed, that dreamed, that trusted without hesitation. In that moment, you understand that clarity was not lost. It was simply waiting for the right divine moment to return. God's signs are not limited to the extraordinary. They do not always arrive wrapped in miracles or dramatic moments that reshape the sky. More often they travel through the ordinary, through people, through quiet moments, through unexpected conversations, through silence that speaks louder than words. When you are at the edge of giving up, your heart becomes unusually sensitive to meaning. You begin searching for anything that feels like direction, like comfort, like a reason not to let go. And in that vulnerable space, God often uses the simplest pieces of life to remind you He is near. A sign may not look spiritual at first glance, but something inside you recognizes it instantly. It touches the very part of you that is tired, confused, or afraid. You know it is not random because it reaches your heart in a way nothing else can. Sometimes the sign comes through a person, not necessarily someone close to you, and not always in a dramatic way. It may be a stranger who says something unexpectedly relevant, or a friend who calls at the precise moment your strength is slipping. It might be someone telling you a story that mirrors your own struggle, giving you clarity without even knowing what you're facing. A single conversation can lift a weight you've carried for months. A simple word can interrupt a spiral of doubt. A person may walk into your life briefly, yet leave behind a message that feels heaven-sent. God uses people as mirrors, as messengers, as carriers of hope, especially when you feel unseen. You may wonder how they knew exactly what you needed to hear, but deep down you understand, the message wasn't from them. It was through them. Other times, the sign arrives in a moment so small that you might miss it if your heart weren't breaking open. It can be the way sunlight breaks through clouds after days of darkness, or the way your heart feels strangely peaceful in a situation that once overwhelmed you. It may be a verse, a lyric, a memory that resurfaces at just the right time. These moments carry a gentle reassurance, a quiet echo of the truth you forgot, that you are not abandoned, that your journey still holds purpose, that your story is far from over. When you feel like giving up, even the smallest moment can feel like a lifeline, and God knows exactly when to place it in your path. There are also signs that appear through timing, a door that opens when you were ready to close every door in your life, an opportunity that arrives after a long season of rejection, a message you receive at the hour you desperately needed direction. Timing has its own language, and God speaks through it often. When something aligns perfectly at the very moment you feel lost, it is not coincidence. It is orchestration. It is the unseen hand arranging pieces you didn't even know were connected. Timing becomes a sign when it interrupts despair, offering you a reason to take one more step. And then there is the sign that comes through silence. This is the one people misunderstand the most. When heaven grows quiet, we assume we are forgotten. But silence can be one of God's strongest signals. It can be the space where He prepares what you cannot yet carry. It can be the pause before the answer, the breath before the breakthrough. Silence invites stillness, and in stillness your fears settle enough for truth to rise. Silence is not abandonment, it is alignment. It is God teaching you to listen, not with your ears but with your spirit. What feels like emptiness may actually be preparation for clarity. In every form, a divine sign carries one purpose: to remind you that you are guided, even when you do not feel strong enough to keep moving. The sign tells you that strength is not something you must create alone. It shows you that God walks into your story through ordinary moments, through familiar faces, through unexpected calm, through the hidden language of timing, through silence that reshapes your heart. These signs do not always change your situation instantly, but they change you. They give you renewed hope, soften fear, and restored direction. When God sends a sign, it does more than guide your next step. It reassures you that your journey is not random, that your pain is not unseen, and that your prayers are not ignored. It shows you that help can arrive quietly, through anything and anyone. Sometimes the sign is a message. Sometimes it is a person. Sometimes it is peace. Sometimes it is the absence of noise. But each sign carries the same truth: you are not alone, and giving up is not your destiny. When God sends you a sign in the moment you are closest to giving up, it is never just guidance. It is a declaration of presence. It is His way of stepping into the silence you thought was empty, reminding you that even when your strength fails, His does not. A sign is not simply a direction pointing forward, it is an embrace for a weary soul. It tells you that the tears you cried in secret were not wasted, that the prayers you uttered in exhaustion were not ignored, and that the confusion you felt was not a sign of abandonment, but a space where faith was quietly being rebuilt. When God moves, He does not just answer a question, He touches the heart behind it. He calms the storm within long before He calms the storm around. There comes a moment when your spirit feels drained and hollow, when the world seems too heavy to hold and the future lacks the clarity you once trusted. You may feel forgotten, overlooked, or simply too broken to stand again. But the sign God sends, whether it comes as a whisper, a moment of peace, a person, or a sudden clarity, is infused with His presence. It carries the weight of reassurance, the warmth of divine companionship. It does not simply tell you what to do. It reminds you that you do not have to face your journey alone. It restores your courage not by promising ease, but by promising that you are not walking this road without Him. A divine sign is often subtle, but the comfort it brings is profound. It reaches the parts of your heart that words cannot explain. It steadies the trembling you try so hard to hide from others. It fills the cracks formed by disappointment. When you receive such a sign, something inside you softens. The heaviness does not disappear immediately, but it becomes bearable because you sense a presence greater than your struggle. You realize that God has been watching you all along, not from a distance, but from beside you. Every tear, every breath of frustration, every step you took when you wanted to stop was seen by Him, and the sign becomes His gentle way of saying, "I never left." This kind of reassurance changes how you carry your burdens. You stop feeling like the entire weight of your life is on your shoulders alone. You begin to trust the process in a deeper, quieter way. Fear does not vanish, but it loses its authority. Doubt does not disappear, but it loses its power. You feel strengthened not because the journey suddenly lightens, but because you are reminded that divine strength fills the gaps where your own strength fades. The sign becomes the reminder that His presence is your protection, your guidance, your stability. When God sends this type of sign, it also rekindles a sense of purpose you thought had died. The dreams you buried under fatigue rise again with a softer light. The desires you assumed were ignored now feel seen and valued. You begin to understand that delay does not mean denial, and silence does not mean absence. His presence gives your hope new breath. You walk differently, not with the desperate pace of someone trying to survive, but with the quiet confidence of someone who knows they are supported. You stop looking at life as a series of battles you must win and start seeing it as a journey you do not walk alone. God's presence in the sign is also a promise that your story is not over, a promise that your struggle has meaning, a promise that your breakthrough is on the horizon, even if you cannot see it yet. And because He is with you, you find the courage to keep going one more day, to take one more step, to believe one more time. A sign becomes the hand that lifts your chin when your head hangs too low. It becomes the voice that steadies you when despair tries to pull you back into darkness. It becomes the spark that revives your faith. And perhaps the most powerful aspect of this presence is the reminder that God's love is not conditional on your strength. He does not come to you because you are brave. He comes because you are His. He does not step in because you have everything figured out. He steps in because you are struggling. His presence is not earned by endurance, it is given by grace. So when God sends you a sign right before you give up, understand this: it is more than direction. It is His reassurance that you are seen, known, and deeply loved. It is His affirmation that He is walking with you, guiding your footsteps even when they falter. And it is His quiet but powerful declaration that your journey is not ending, because He is not finished with you. In the end, every moment of doubt, every tear shed in silence, every step taken in exhaustion becomes part of a larger testimony, one that reveals how God meets you exactly where your strength ends. The breaking point becomes the doorway to breakthrough. The whisper becomes the anchor of faith. The test becomes the purifier of purpose. The blurry path becomes clear again under divine realignment. The ordinary moments become vessels for extraordinary guidance, and the sign itself becomes a reminder that you were never walking alone, not even for a second. When God sends a sign right before you give up, it is His way of pulling you back to your own destiny, reminding you that surrendering your story is not an option because He has written too much beauty into chapters you have yet to see. Hope returns not as a flicker but as a steady flame, because His presence has proven stronger than your despair. You rise again because He chose to lift you, guide you, and fight for you in the very moment you felt unworthy of continuing. Thank you for listening to this message with an open heart. May these words strengthen your spirit and give you the courage to keep moving forward. I wish you clarity in your confusion, peace in your storms, strength in your weakness, and signs that remind you how deeply you are loved and guided. Good luck on your journey, and may God bless you every step of the way.